Everyone thinks capitalism and socialism are opposites. One praises the free market, the other worships the plan. One glorifies the entrepreneur, the other sanctifies the worker. But what if both systems were powered by the same invisible engine, one that neither side ever truly controlled? Look closer. Behind every economic miracle, every revolution of the people, every era of prosperity, there was always the same mechanism quietly humming: the ability to create money out of promises. Capitalism calls it credit, socialism calls it state planning. But underneath the names, it's the same act: fabricating tomorrow's wealth today and hoping the math catches up later. It's a strange paradox. Both the capitalist and the socialist swear they're enemies, yet both live on borrowed time and borrowed money. The banker and the bureaucrat, supposedly mortal rivals, are two sides of the same printing press. In 1929, Wall Street's skyscrapers trembled because private credit ran out. In 1989, the Kremlin's concrete blocks crumbled because state credit ran out. Two systems, two ideologies, one mathematical collapse. Promises that exceeded production. But no one tells you that. Officially, capitalism fell into speculation and socialism into inefficiency. Those are just polite words for the same sin, trying to fund the future without the real capital to back it. Think about this. Every empire, from Rome to Washington, from London to Moscow, grew not on gold or grain, but on confidence. A promise written on paper, or now in code, became more valuable than the thing it represented. That's how both capitalism and socialism built their worlds. The trick wasn't production, it was persuasion. You've seen it: the stock ticker climbing, the 5-year plan expanding, the GDP growing like a balloon. Each one an illusion of infinite motion. But the air inside? Always debt. Always tomorrow's labor, today's consumption, and the belief that the system itself could never run out of trust. What's hidden in plain sight is that both systems needed someone to play God, to decide when money was real. In capitalism, it's the central banker. In socialism, it's the state planner. But both perform the same magic trick. They turn political will into economic substance. They say, "Let there be liquidity," and suddenly the world moves. This is not ideology, it's mechanics. Every ism is just a casing for the same engine, a financial one that converts belief into numbers and numbers into power. When that belief fades, no slogan saves the system. So if you've ever wondered why both free markets and planned economies eventually drown in crises, inflation, or stagnation, it's because neither ever solved the riddle of real value. They only learned how to postpone its reckoning. That's the secret both sides kept from you. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because if people truly understood how fragile the foundation was, they might stop playing the game. If this made you question what money really means, comment where you're watching from. The story you've been told about capitalism versus socialism is only the cover page. The real story begins underneath the balance sheet. Let's go back to where the illusion began. Not with Marx or Adam Smith, but with gold, and the moment humanity realized it could replace it with a promise. In the 17th century, merchants in London discovered a shortcut. Instead of carrying chests of coins, they left their gold with goldsmiths and took receipts instead, slips of paper claiming the bearer owns this much. Those receipts began to circulate as money. The trick was simple. Only a few people ever came back for the gold. So the goldsmiths printed more receipts than they had metal in the vault. It was the birth of fractional reserve banking, and the first time private credit became a source of power greater than kings. By 1694, this private trick became institutionalized with the creation of the Bank of England. It was sold as a patriotic necessity to fund war against France, but in truth, it was a revolutionary idea: a private company lending to the state, and in return, the state guaranteeing its paper as real money. That's when the line between capitalism and government blurred forever. From that day, money stopped being a thing and became a relationship, a debt backed by authority. Capitalism grew around it. Empires were financed not by treasure, but by bonds. The British East India Company conquered half the world using borrowed credit from the City of London. Every colony, every railroad, every war, financed by promises stacked on promises. A century later, socialism tried to build its own version of that mechanism. The Bolsheviks overthrew banks, nationalized industry, and swore to end exploitation, but they couldn't escape arithmetic. They still needed credit, just under a different name, state planning. Instead of banks issuing debt, ministries issued targets. Instead of shareholders expecting dividends, citizens expected rations and wages. The state became the banker, the central allocator of value, promising future abundance in exchange for present obedience. Different ideology, same logic. The socialist planner and the capitalist banker both did the same thing. They issued claims on the future. One called it production quotas, the other securities. One printed rubles, the other printed bonds. And both relied on trust. Trust that people would keep working, keep producing, keep believing that paper meant something. In the 20th century, the mechanism scaled up into a global system. The Federal Reserve in the United States, founded in 1913, perfected the model. It tied public debt and private banking into a single loop. The government borrows from banks borrow from the central bank, and the central bank creates money to buy the government's debt. A self-referential circle that could, in theory, spin forever, as long as faith remained intact. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union built its mirror image, a command economy where every factory's output was matched by another's input, where balance sheets were filled not with profits, but with planned quotas. They replaced prices with politics. But underneath, the structure was identical. Both systems printed expectations and counted them as wealth. Here's the hidden symmetry. Capitalism privatized credit. Socialism nationalized it. One distributed debt among millions of consumers and investors. The other centralized it in the hands of bureaucrats. But both depended on expanding promises faster than the real economy could deliver. That's why both systems required constant growth, not out of greed or ideology, but survival. If the debt stops expanding, the money supply contracts. Factories close, banks fail, revolutions ignite. Whether you're running a capitalist market or a socialist state, the same law applies. Credit must grow, or the illusion breaks. This is the invisible engine that shaped the modern world, the engine neither side dared to dismantle because it made them gods for a while. There was a time when everyone believed the system worked. The graphs pointed upward, the factories roared, the cities glittered. Both capitalism and socialism had entered their golden ages, built not on balance but on acceleration. In the capitalist world, the miracle came after World War II. The United States held 2/3 of the planet's gold, and the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 turned the dollar into the world's reserve currency. The message was clear. Trust the paper, because behind it, there's gold in Fort Knox. But as the decades passed, that link became symbolic, more faith than fact. By the 1960s, America printed dollars far beyond its gold reserves to finance the Vietnam War and the consumer boom. The world accepted the paper anyway. After all, who would question the empire that had never defaulted? Meanwhile, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, socialism staged its own miracle. Under Stalin's 5-year plans and later Khrushchev's industrial programs, the Soviet Union transformed from a peasant nation into a nuclear superpower. Massive dams, steelworks, and space rockets, all funded by the same mechanism capitalism used: future promises. The plan always looked balanced on paper. Every ton of coal matched a ton of steel, every worker a quota. Numbers were the new religion, and no one dared to ask if they were real. Both systems discovered the same narcotic: growth. For the capitalist, it came in the form of consumer credit and stock prices. For the socialist, it came through production statistics and ideological triumphs. And both had their own propaganda. The West said, "Buy now, pay later." The East said, "Sacrifice now, prosper later." Different slogans, same math. In the 1950s and 60s, bankers became magicians. They didn't just lend money, they created it. A bank deposit wasn't gold in a vault, it was a keystroke in a ledger. And every loan expanded the money supply. The economy became a perpetual motion machine powered by confidence. As long as people borrowed and spent, The illusion held. At the same time, socialist planners performed their own miracle of multiplication. The rubles on their spreadsheets represented goods that didn't yet exist. Targets were overfulfilled on paper, and central committees celebrated growth while factories quietly hid shortages. The illusion was so complete that both systems exported it abroad: capitalism through the Marshall Plan and corporate expansion, socialism through Comic-Con and ideological satellites. Each side believed it was building a new world order, but there was one silent rule holding everything together: trust. Trust that the dollar was backed by something. Trust that the plan was achievable. Trust that tomorrow would always produce enough to repay today's promises. And for a while, it worked, because the numbers grew faster than doubt. By the 1970s, the world was living in a financial dream. Credit cards replaced cash. Governments ran deficits without panic. Corporations expanded globally on borrowed dollars. The Soviet Union claimed it had surpassed capitalism in steel and education. Both sides were intoxicated by their own arithmetic. But every illusion carries a cost. As more paper was issued, dollars, rubles, bonds, quotas, the distance between money and real value widened. It was no longer gold or grain that defined wealth, but digits and declarations. The same dynamic that had once fueled growth now demanded ever more expansion to stay alive. The capitalist system hid this behind innovation. The socialist system hid it behind progress. Yet both were doing the same thing: rolling their debts forward, turning future labor into today's comfort, and pretending that belief could be endlessly monetized. And when belief becomes the main commodity, collapse is only a matter of timing. It always ends the same way. The numbers stop obeying the story. In 1971, the illusion cracked in the West. President Richard Nixon stood before the cameras and announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. It was supposed to be a minor technical measure. In reality, it was the moment capitalism untethered itself from the physical world. The promise that every dollar was worth something real, gone. The world's money became pure abstraction, value backed only by trust in government and the banking system. That temporary decision never ended. The dollar floated freely, unanchored, and the era of fiat money began. Inflation surged, oil prices exploded, and the 1970s taught the world an ugly truth. You can print credit, but you can't print oil, wheat, or time. At the same moment, across the Iron Curtain, socialism met its own arithmetic wall. The Soviet economy, which had looked unstoppable in the 1950s, began to slow. The planned economy could no longer keep up with the complexity it had created. Bureaucrats set quotas for everything: nails, tractors, shoes. But the system had become a maze of contradictions. Factories met their targets by gaming the numbers. Plans were fulfilled on paper while shortages filled the shelves. The more the state planned, the less it could see. And by the 1980s, the Soviet Union was drowning in invisible debt. Not the financial kind, but a debt of reality. Years of pretending that paper plans equaled production had finally reached the point where the math no longer added up. In both systems, politics refused to admit what arithmetic already knew. Western leaders told citizens that inflation was a temporary disturbance. Soviet planners blamed saboteurs and bad weather. But beneath the speeches, the truth was mechanical. The promises had outgrown the capacity to deliver. Then came the crashes, each different in form, identical in cause. In the capitalist world, the 1973 oil crisis, the Latin American debt meltdown of the 1980s, the savings and loan collapse of the early 1990s. Each one a tremor caused by excessive leverage, too much paper chasing too little reality. In the socialist world, the 1980s reforms, perestroika, were an attempt to do what central banks do: inject new credit, new energy, new faith. But it was too late. When the ruble lost credibility, the Soviet state lost legitimacy. In 1991, the Red Empire collapsed not because of ideology, but because it ran out of trust, the one currency even governments can't print. For a moment, it looked like capitalism had won, but victory was just another illusion. The same mechanism that destroyed socialism, credit expansion without foundation, was already devouring capitalism from within. The 1990s and 2000s were only an echo of the same cycle. Dot-coms, subprime mortgages, quantitative easing. New names, same physics. Arithmetic never takes sides. It doesn't care if you call it the market or the plan. When debt outpaces production, when paper outruns substance, collapse is only delayed, never avoided. And that's the truth both systems discovered too late. Money can lie for decades, but the ledger always tells the truth in the end. If you've ever wondered why every boom in history seems to end in crisis, this is why. The system doesn't collapse because of evil or error. It collapses because numbers, unlike ideologies, refuse to believe. If that realization hit you, pause and comment, because understanding this moment means seeing through every future promise that begins with the words, "This time is different." We like to think that history moved on, that we've outgrown the illusions of the past. The truth is, we've only upgraded them. After the Cold War, both capitalism and socialism seemed dead, replaced by something new, globalization. The markets opened, the internet connected, and a new religion was born, financial technology. It promised efficiency instead of ideology. But behind the new screens and smart contracts, the old mechanism kept spinning. When the U.S. Federal Reserve slashed interest rates in the early 2000s, it was the same act as a Soviet Gosplan adjusting a 5-year target, an attempt to keep the machine running. Every recession became a problem of liquidity, and the solution was always more credit. By 2008, the numbers reached another breaking point. The global financial crisis revealed that banks had created trillions in synthetic wealth, mortgage-backed securities, derivatives, shadow money, all dependent on one fragile assumption, that borrowers would keep paying. When they didn't, the illusion collapsed again. Governments rushed in, printed trillions, and saved the system, not by reforming it, but by doubling down. Debt wasn't reduced, it was transferred. Private losses became public obligations. The state became banker once more, just like in 1694. The circle closed. And in the East, history repeated under new symbols. China, officially communist, built the world's most credit-driven growth model. Skyscrapers rose on borrowed yuan, infrastructure on local government debt, exports on global leverage. It looked different until you noticed the same pattern. Expansion sustained by confidence, not profit. Today, in 2025, the mechanism no longer hides behind ideology. It wears the mask of digital finance. Central banks talk about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, promising efficiency, inclusion, stability. But what they're really building is the next version of the same ancient device, centralized issuance of trust. A programmable form of money where every unit, every transaction can be controlled and conjured by design. In parallel, private actors, crypto projects, fintech giants, algorithmic stablecoins have reinvented the same dream from the other side. Decentralized, they claim. But most of these tokens, too, are backed by faith, not value. When belief falters, the price collapses. The mathematics doesn't care if it's blockchain or bureaucracy. What's astonishing is how both forces, digital capitalism and digital socialism, are merging. The tech monopolies of Silicon Valley now play the role of private central banks, issuing credit in the form of attention and data. Governments, in turn, regulate, borrow, and depend on these platforms to manage public sentiment and economic flow. The alliance of code and credit has replaced the alliance of crown and coin. And yet, the moral remains the same. The world economy still runs on deferred reality. The charts rise, the debts grow, and every innovation is another way of stretching tomorrow into today. It's elegant, it's efficient, and it's doomed by the same constraint that haunted every empire before. The real economy, energy, labor, trust, cannot expand forever. That's why every crisis now feels familiar. 2008, 2020, 2022, each one followed by stimulus, bailouts, injections, promises. The scale changes, the logic doesn't. Both capitalism and socialism once claimed to free humanity from scarcity. In the end, both became machines to delay it. Look around. The spreadsheets are bigger, the digits faster, the illusions smarter, But the engine underneath hasn't changed since the goldsmiths of London. It's still belief alchemized into numbers. And belief, as every empire learns, is the most volatile asset of all. Stand back for a moment. Strip away the slogans: capitalism, socialism, innovation, equality. And what remains? A single law. Whoever controls the creation of money controls the rhythm of civilization. And every civilization, in time, confuses that rhythm with reality. Both systems, the market and the plan, promised freedom. Capitalism said, you can own your future. Socialism said, we will protect it for you. But in both, the same invisible contract ruled. You must believe. Believe that paper equals value, that growth equals prosperity, that someone somewhere can keep the books balanced. The tragedy is not that people were deceived. It's that the system needed them to believe in order to exist. Like oxygen to a flame, faith kept the credit burning. Faith in the market's wisdom, faith in the party's vision, faith in the experts who knew what they were doing. And every generation, blinded by progress, mistook borrowed time for genuine stability. When the Roman Empire debased its silver, it was to buy another decade of peace. When the French Revolution printed assignats, it was to fund liberty. When America unleashed digital dollars, it was to save the economy. Each time the motive sounded noble. Each time arithmetic was ignored. And arithmetic never forgives. This is the real law of money. Not moral, not political, but natural. You cannot compound promises faster than you compound reality. At some point, the numbers demand payment, and they always collect, in inflation, in default, or in revolution. We think we've mastered the system because we can code it now, automate it, run it on servers instead of ledgers. But the medium doesn't change the rule. The old goldsmith's trick has become the global operating system. Every tap on your screen, every credit, every token is still the same act, pulling value from the future to spend in the present. The true divide was never capitalism versus socialism. It was those who issue promises versus those who must keep them. And history, at its core, is the story of that imbalance, recycled, renamed, refined, but never resolved. If you're hearing this in 2025, understand this. The next great struggle won't be over ideology, but over control of the digital mint. Who gets to define what's real money and what's merely code? The same old battle, waged in a new arena. So remember this law. Systems don't collapse because of evil. They collapse when trust, credit, or reality stop growing together. The moment they diverge, collapse begins, quietly, invisibly, until one day it's called a crisis. And when that day comes again, as it always does, you'll recognize the sound. It's not chaos. It's the echo of mathematics reclaiming the world from illusion.